Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Cynthia, and then you can say a few words about your role and also Abdul.
Sure thing. Hello, everyone at ARCA. Thanks so much for having Abdul and I. I've been with Thinking Cap about a year and a half ago, and last year when I was really relatively new, and I still feel new to some extent, I actually did this, not Abdul. And yeah, it's out there on YouTube for you to see me stumble through trying to answer questions that Abdul is certainly in a much better place to answer. So happy to be here. The agenda items that Maureen presented to us, there's a couple in there that are around branding related type questions. We're also going to be joined by Isabel Wallace at around 3 o'clock today. She's the co-owner of Thinking Cap, and she'll be addressing and presenting on those branding items. Yeah, that's it for me. Abdul.
Well, Abdul is unmuting. I'm just gonna add, if you could just add the acronym for your regional center after your name, it's really helpful for me, and I think probably for Cynthia and Abdul to kind of know when you're asking questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can, raise your hand, use the reactions button to raise your hand. It's helpful for us to know what regional center you're with, because it kind of gives us an idea of the context of your question. So thank you for doing that. And Abdul, I'm turning it back over to you. Sorry.
No problem. Good morning, everyone. My name is Abdul. I am the resident trainer here at Thinking Cap. I've been with the company just over 9 years now. I've been doing this for a while, so you can assume. I started off with support, so I have a understanding how things break and how we fix them. Today's goal is to go through as many questions as you guys have using the agenda that we also have. As mentioned by Cynthia, Isabel will be joining us for the branding section of this training around 3 p.m. our time, which will be around 12 p.m. your time. And I am also obviously going to be walking through everything using your LMS. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just give you guys an example. If there's any issues at any point with seeing my screen, if it lags in any way, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll be keeping an eye out for any questions anyone throws my way in the chat. Feel free to jump in and interrupt if needed. Definitely not a problem. Now, we do have quite a bit to get through, and I'm going to do my best to kind of keep it as simple as possible. So it's never an issue if you get stuck on anything, you get confused about something, you need to clarify anything, please speak up. That's the entire point of this training session. And of course, whenever you guys need breaks, please let me know. I tend to just ramble on at times. So whenever we need to run to the washroom for absolutely anything, just feel free just to jump in and be like, hey, can we take a 5-minute break? Now, before we actually get started, does anyone have any issues with, by the way, feel free to either follow along with me as I'm doing this. Otherwise you can just pay attention. It is all being recorded. So if you have questions you want to start throwing my way, it's definitely not a problem. Before we do get started today, does anyone have any immediate questions? That also goes to Maureen as well. Is there anything particular you want me to begin with, or any other introductions we need to do before we get started? Okay, no worries. I'm always going to assume silence means no, by the way. So if there is something like that, I will just assume we just need to move on. Now, the first thing I want you to do is just kind of keep things simple. I'm going to show you guys just how to add an e-learning course. I know there's a video of it, but I feel like starting here would be a good starting point for us for what we're trying to do today. Then we'll get into the more complicated things like how do we automate completion reports or uploading packages to the e-learning course that we just created. Maureen, is there a particular domain I should be doing this on, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I mean, you can use mine if you want to, not clutter up anybody in particular, or the sandbox, either way.
No problem. Let's do 2022 sandbox just to be sure. Let's make sure the link works. Okay, great. So we will be using this. And of course, I will explain to the best of my ability on how this might be applied to your specific domain. So if there's any specific questions about that, we can definitely do it based on that as well. So
Abdul, it
yes.
also, if you're using that domain, people will notice that the branding on there is different because it's the new branding. So when you switch between the learner view and the admin view, please know that this is coming, but it's not happening in the immediate future, but in the future, we'll be switching to a new, more interactive branding.
No problem. Okay, so I'm going to keep one window open that's going to be specific to the learner view, and we're going to use this URL for that. As you can see, this is our fancy learner view here. And on the left-hand side will be where we do all of our work in the admin view. Your entry point does not matter. As long as you can see your domain, wherever it may be, on your LMS, that's all that matters in here. And of course, your learner view is going to look vastly different. But if there's any questions about anything specific that you see in here, just feel free to speak up. So let's start off with adding an activity. I'm sure you've all done this at some point, but it's a good refresher to have. So let's go ahead. So you're going to choose, yep, any questions? Okay, cool. Just making sure. Let's start then. So we're going to go to choose our domain. I'm obviously going to be doing this on the sandbox domain. We're going to then go to add activity. And of course, we're doing an e-learning course, the most basic one. So we're going to click on that. And it should always lead us to the basic information page. It doesn't matter what type of activity you are creating, you will always have access, you will always see this first. So we provide a title, a code, and a description. And let me explain what each one of these things do. Your course title, of course, is what the learner gets to see. So if I put something like Health and Safety 2022, this is obviously what the learner will be able to see. You can use this for searching as well as you can for the code. Now, the code is the unique identifier, meaning there will only ever be one of these items on the entire LMS. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, what happens if I have 3 or 4 courses that I want to kind of pack together in a learning path? Do they all have to have completely separate codes? No, they don't. So in this case, if we were creating a learning path, and we're going to call this course the introduction course. In this case, this would be the first course that I want my learner to take within the learning path or curriculum. So in that case, I would try and label it in a way that's easier for me to find. Now, we do suggest that you avoid putting spaces in here. You can if you want to, but it will make things a little bit more difficult when searching. So I, in turn, use the following options instead. So as you can see, I've used underscores and dashes. You can also use periods. You can essentially use anything that is an alternative to a space if you want to keep things simple, because now when you use this or whenever you search this, it will immediately bring up this specific item. Now, if I was trying to find additional things, like maybe there is an assessment that comes with this, how would I add a modifier to this? Well, simply do this. So if there were 5 courses that were supposed to be associated with the health and safety learning path, I would list them all with health underscore and underscore safety dash 2022 dash 01, 02, 03, 04, and so on. That way, you'll be able to see it's all associated with one another. So when you're searching for them, it will locate all of them. But if you're looking for a specific one, you just add the number in there. Of course, you don't have to follow anything I'm saying in this area, but it makes things easier, and it makes it easier for us whenever we're searching it as admins or support members. Let's talk about the description. Now, you can make things fancy in here. The reason behind that is because it uses HTML. I won't go into that unless someone specifically requests for me to do that, because it does take a bit of explanation about what you can do. But the idea is, if you see a box like this, you can add things to it to make it pretty. For example, if you wanted to add an image that will go directly here, you could. You could also link to a file that you upload to the media area. So let me give you a quick example of that. So let's say I wanted the learner just to also possibly view or give them the option to view a document prior to them taking this activity. I could do something like this. Now in here, I would select this and then select this option right here. Now you need to provide a URL. Now this could be something that's hosted locally, which is what we always suggest, or it could be to an external site as well. Now in our case, I'm just going to upload a PDF as an example. So it would just be something quick that the learner has to review. It's not absolutely required. If it was, we could just add it as an actual file instead as the course content. But in our case, we just want to have something for them to review as the example we're trying to do in here. Let's give this one moment. Maybe it'd be easy if I do through this one. There we go. So I'm on the same domain. I just opened up a separate tab, and all I'm going to do is just upload something to here. And you can upload whatever you want. If you wanted to provide a link to a video, you absolutely could. There's a full list of items you can upload right here, and we'll paste that into the chat box as well. In the media section, you can upload 10 items at a time. And this also comes in handy whenever you want to put stuff in for the pages section. So whenever you're dealing with branding, maybe you want to have a video link on the learner view. This is kind of the area you should come to make that happen. Now, to add items to here, you can either choose manually or drag and drop them. I personally prefer choosing manually because it gives you a progress bar as it's going through. So that way you can tell how long it's going to take for the item to finish uploading. So in this case, I'm just going to select a couple of items that we can reuse later on. So I'm going to do this PDF and this video, and let's keep it at that. So there you go. As you can see, it showed me a progress bar as I'm uploading. So that way I'm not wondering if it's going to actually finish. When you drag and drop it, sometimes it doesn't show it. So I would thoroughly suggest you use this option instead. Now, what do we do from here? I'm going to refresh this page. And now we should be able to see our media files. There we go. And all we need is a link. So we're going to go to that PDF, go to the summary button, and simply copy this. Because it's hosted locally, it's always easier to use this method versus going through, let's say, it being hosted on somewhere completely different, because that way you have to worry about the link possibly not working because that website might be down. You don't need to worry about that with the LMS, because if the link isn't working, the LMS isn't working. So there's already a bigger problem there. It basically means that it's one area where everything is stored. It's easier for you to manage that way as well. And there we go. So now there would be a direct link the learner can review whenever they're reading the actual description. You can keep adding more and more stuff into it. You don't even need to use this editor that we have here. If you would prefer to do it in raw HTML, as you can see, by using the code view option right here, you can provide the information. And if you know HTML or have an HTML editor program, or even use a website similar to this, you could just simply copy and paste that information into this area. And then, of course, it would be translated to show how it's going to potentially look to the learner. Now, of course, this is kind of advanced stuff, but it's good to know just in case you want to make your descriptions pretty. So that covers title, code, and description. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've mentioned about this type of stuff?
Can you bold things or highlight things in the description?
Yes, so in here, let's do bold. Highlighting might be a little more different, so that might need some messing around, but we can figure that out in here. Basically, if it can be done in HTML, you should be able to do it in our LMS. So in this case, copy this, and I assume this would be, yeah, that should be highlighting. So let's do this as green. Looks kind of gross, but we'll copy it from the raw HTML here. And then you have to click on the vertical ellipses where it says more miscellaneous, and then click on the code view option. You have to make sure it's blue. Let's paste it at the bottom here. And there we go. We do know that we need to add a couple of more items in this little editor, but as you can assume, if it's available in HTML, you should also be able to do it in the description or in any box that you see that functions like this.
Can you put the editor URL in the chat?
Absolutely. Let me do that right now. Thank you.
No problem. I actually also had a question.
Yes.
How does adding a link, I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but how does adding a link in the description area here differ, or is it more beneficial than adding an item, because you were doing a PDF in the reference material section?
There wouldn't actually be much of a difference. This is more of
Okay.
an additional link area, because the resource, once again, you can absolutely upload it in the resource area, but this is more of a direct, like, just in case you want to lightly guide them into the correct location, be like, hey, there's resources, or just click this link right here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think when you first started, you said you want them to do this prior to the course. And people don't always go to the show. They see the resources, but they don't, unless you direct them to please download the resources. If they read the description and they see a link in there, they're more likely to click on that. So if you want them, like, let's say you've got 5 resources in there, but you want them to download the manual first, then putting it in the description as a link might, and directing them to it might be helpful.
I absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions about this before we move on?
One question.
Yes.
So if that document is located on our network, can I link to that?
Yeah.
You can link it, but it might not open depending on your network settings. Just an FYI, you would have to host it like on OneDrive. That would probably be my recommendation.
Okay.
The learner may need to log in. There could also be multiple options that associate with it. Like if it's an open link, anyone should be able to view it. But as mentioned, if it links to an external site, they may be required to log in. There might be additional steps required.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on?
You can always host it on Google Drive if it's not a sensitive document. I mean, if it's just a workbook or something, just host it on Google Drive and make it, available for anybody with the link to get it. It won't be public. It'll just be anybody with the link can view it. So if it's not a sensitive document, that's what I do.
So if they're already logged into the network, the link should work.
Hypothetically, yes.
Yes. Protected folder or something that all staff do not have access to. Yeah, if they're logged into the network and it's on your network in a shared drive for everybody, then yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, no worries. So the next section is going to be this little area. Don't worry, we're not going to spend as much time as we did on this area. I just want to explain a bit more about this section, especially the description. Is just, you can do a lot more if you know what you're capable of doing or have the keys to what you need to do. So we can skip the tags option right here because this is no longer being used. This is actually something that will eventually be phased out and hidden. Just assume it doesn't exist anymore. Marquee. Okay, so this one is going to be where you would like there to be a thumbnail image on the learner view whenever your course is being accessed. So we're going to take a look at this after we've set this course to active. The idea is just a simple thumbnail. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can also choose an image directly from the media library if one is uploaded. We currently don't have one, so I'm just going to choose a very basic one in here. I also did want to mention that if you plan on using an MP4 file, it will actually take the first image from the video and apply it as the default image for the marquee. Actually, you know what? That's a good idea. I'm probably going to use a MP4 file as our content, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. So that way you can see how it pulls the image directly from there. And if one of the questions is, okay, if we don't want to use that image, can we replace it? The answer is yes. I will also show you how to do that. So we're not going to add anything in here for the time being because we're going to see what it looks like once we have an MP4 file as our content, and then we'll come back to this area. Course language. This should be pretty straightforward. This is going to be the language that your course is available in. Now, if your course package uses multiple languages within it, simply label it as English and in the description mention that they can choose a different language. That would be the best option for multi-language course packages. The estimated learning time gives the learner an idea of how long it's going to take for them to complete the activity. Always try and put something in it, even if it's something as simple as 5 minutes, because when you add this activity to a learning path, this is what accumulates the overall time for the learning path itself. So let's say I have 5 courses, all e-learning courses, they're all listed at 5 minutes a piece. The overall estimated learning time, let me word that again. The learning path estimated learning time, there we go, would be 25 minutes because each course is estimated to take 5 minutes for the learner, and there's 5 of them. That's why this part is kind of useful. It's not required, but it's good housekeeping. The next item is the moderator. Now, this will only work if you plan on using notifications and you want to be copied in on those notifications as well. So let's say I assign myself as the moderator here. This means that whenever we have a notification that goes out to a learner and I have select the facilitator to get a carbon copy, I will also receive a copy of the outgoing notification. And this will work the same way for all notifications for this activity specifically. So once we get to the notification section, we're going to take a quick look at how this would play. But the idea is the person you select on this page is going to be the person who receives those outgoing notifications.
So moderator and facilitator are interchangeable words.
Yes. Yep. And yes, we are planning on updating that so they both say the same thing. We're just trying to figure out exactly what would be the best terminology for that. Moderator equals facilitator. Always assume that. Equivalencies. Maureen, is equivalency something worth going into right now? Is this important for what we're doing?
Not for this, but I think we need to discuss equivalencies later on. Yes.
Okay, no problem. We'll get back to this then. Now, the remaining items will be your metadata. Now, this part is going to be different based on what domain you have access to. You may not see these exact same things in here. Now, once again, depending on what domain you have access to, where you can create content, you may not see these exact same ones. The only ones you ever really need to worry about are going to be the ones that might have an asterisk right next to it, because those are required. They should look a bit like this, but the title of the field will instead be listed there. That means you must fill that field out for you to move forward. If at any point you're not sure about what needs to go in here, don't worry about it. Come back to it later. It's always easier just to add the information later on rather than try and fix a mistake that when you're not sure what should be selected. Now, in my case, I'm not really going to update anything in here. The only thing that I might do is choose the user type of who should be receiving or who should have access to this activity once it's launched. So if I want to add it to a page where courses should only be available to clients or something along the lines of that, this is where I would choose that information. This is where you choose your course metadata. So that way, when we update the pages section and we get to the branding area, this is where we can pull those courses in to display on those pages. We will come back and talk about this a bit more later on once we get towards the branding section, so it will make a bit more sense. But this is a general idea that this is the area you will come to update metadata for your activity.
Now, Abdul, also, you can choose more than one user type. It's not a single choice, it's a multiple choice. So you can hit the control button and you can choose them all if the training is appropriate for clients, parents, staff, and providers. You can check them all.
That is absolutely correct. Basically, anything that is not a drop-down menu like this and looks like this, you can choose more than one. All you do is hold the control button on your keyboard, as mentioned by Maureen, and then you can select it. And if you need to select all, hit Control A, and it will select all of them for the entire thing. So that way we know that this course would technically be available for every person who's listed as anything under the user type here.
Can you clarify the catalog tags? Is that used for searching courses in certain categories?
So that's a very good question. Maureen, would this be for the older catalogs? Okay.
No, this is a shared catalog tag drop down, or multiple choice, I should say, not a drop down. And yes, when you create your pages in your catalog where you've got different things categorized, Like for instance, if it's related to behavioral services, then go in and choose ABA, and maybe you want to choose autism. You can choose more than one. And that way your catalog page, you can set up a rule saying only pull in things that are tagged ABA. So you could, yeah, this is important to select. You can go back and do it later, but if you know up front when you're creating the course that this is an autism course, then you of course want it to go to the autism page based on that rule on the page, then go ahead and select autism. And I mean, you can select multiple ones. I mean, if it's an instructor-led class and it's on autism, then, and you want it to be showing on the instructor-led page as well as the autism page, then select both of them.
So this directs the user search or limits it. If they put in autism, they won't be shown something else for, I don't know, community services or something like that.
Well, no, the search, the keyword search in the catalog is based on the title and the description. So it has the word autism in the title or autism in the description, regardless of if it's community services or not, it's going to show up in the search. This catalog tag has to do only with when they're in the catalog pages, so that if they click on the catalog page autism, they're only going to see things on autism, not based on the title search or the description search keyword. It's based on the tag only. So that's how you can restrict what they see. But if they're searching in the general search bar that's up on the right in the learner view, they're going to get everything that has autism, and it's not looking for a tag, it's looking for a keyword.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
No problem. Thank you very much, Maureen, for explaining that. Any other questions about any of the information that we've gone through on this page? No worries. We will be coming back to touch upon this when we start dealing with pages and stuff. So we'll put a pin in it for now and let's keep moving forward. So the next thing you do after you updated your basic information, you're going to click on the next button. It will lead you to the content area. So this is where you need to choose your package to upload. We're not going to deal with Studio today, and we're not going to deal with the external area. We don't care about those. We're going to add the information directly through uploading it from our computer or your local device. Now,
Before
yes.
we move on, the Studio package is part of this LMS, and we're not really going to be going over Studio right today because it's an authoring tool.
Yep.
The other thing about the external, it's a link to something else. So if you see a video that's someplace else and you want to add it, you can add the URL here. However, once they click on that training and they're launching something that's outside of the LMS stops tracking it. There's no completion status. You're going to have to manually complete those people in those courses. And then the other thing we've discovered very recently is a lot of times the link is to an Adobe Connect, a video that's on Adobe Connect, and then the user that posted that video doesn't renew their Adobe Connect account, and then you no longer have access to it because it's shut down. So, and people move things on the web all the time. So I would discourage people from putting a link to something outside the LMS for those two reasons.
Thank you. So yeah, if you plan on using external, it's always going to depend on where the link is leading to. And of course, if you ever need assistance with this, feel free to reach out with support. If you're not getting the response you thought you would, we can investigate and explain what the issue is, if there is one, or what would be the workaround for something like that. Okay, so uploading packages. Now, the type of content you can upload here is there's a handful of things you can do. So the basic one that you care about most likely is going to be SCORM packages. You can upload zip files that are SCORM packages that are basically exported in version 1.2 or 2004. This is dependent on the authoring tool you're using and how you exported it. The idea is, if it is SCORM compliant, it will work with our LMS. And of course, if there's any issues with that, we would assist you with trying to figure out what the problem is. The idea is that if it gets a go-ahead from SCORM being SCORM compliant, you should have no problems with uploading it. You are also given the option of uploading a video file, which should be MP4 only, PDF, and a PowerPoint file. These do not need to be in SCORM format, as we're going to see today, because I'm going to upload a MP4 file. Now, when you're using files like MP4s, you can always try uploading it first without having to do anything special to see if it's going to work. But if you do come across an issue where the video file isn't loading for the learner, then that means you most likely need to use a program like Handbrake. Let me show you what that is. Handbrake is a open source video transcoder, which is a fancy way of saying it will update the file to become web optimized, which is the most important part. If you find your MP4 file, regardless of the size, are not playing, you most likely need to run it through a program like this. This is an open source program, meaning it's free. It's very easy to use, but of course, we can also assist with providing a bit of a guide of what you need to do for this. You should only ever do this for your MP4s if they're having a problem. You can take the initiative and do it for all of them. That will save you the headache in the long run. But once again, who really has the time to prepare for stuff like that all the time? Always double check and make sure the video is working. If it's not, this is going to be your option for that. And once again, you can reach out to support via a ticket and we can assist with a guide or help you simply transcode the video. Anything else, not an issue. Your PowerPoint file can be PPT or PPTX. If it works in PowerPoint, it'll work with us. Your PDF, nothing special there. And of course, your SCORM packages, as long as they're SCORM compliant and in a zip file, you should be able to upload them without there being any issue. And the process is always the same. Let me show you. So we click on choose file. Now in here, you just choose one. You can only ever choose one piece of content to upload to an e-learning course. So of course, there would be your SCORM package. It might look a bit like this. Otherwise, in our case, we're going to use the example video that we have in here. And I'm simply going to click on open and then apply. Now, it's probably not going to be this quick for you when you do it. The file size that I used is very small. That's the most important part to keep in mind. When your file is uploading, do not navigate away from this page. Wait until you see this message. Then you can click on OK, and then this should then disappear. And in our top right-hand corner, you can review the jobs that are going on. Now, at the very bottom, you can see that my course is now being uploaded and it's being processed by the LMS. It confirms that because it's in progress. If there was an issue with the course being uploaded, it's either going to provide me with a warning or an error. Warnings mean that the job was almost completed, but there was an issue with trying to do it. Whereas an error means it flat out refused to do the job. You can always review the warnings by simply right-clicking on the page and opening it up in a new tab. By doing this, it will give a message, or it will give our admins an idea of what's wrong. So in this case, as the example in here, it's basically saying that the learner is already enrolled into the activity. Now, of course, we don't expect you personally to decipher all these messages on their own. This is where you would reach out to support at that point and explain, hey, like I got this message, what does this mean? Or basically ask us to investigate what the problem is, and we'll be able to explain what went wrong. What you are looking for is when the course or the item disappears from this area. Now we can see that it's no longer in progress and it doesn't show anything for the activity I've just uploaded. That means it finished processing and it should be done now. So all I do from here is simply refresh the page. You will see me do this a lot. You can wait for the LMS to load the information, but I also do find it's a lot easier just to kind of speed things up by manually refreshing the page. Now from here, we are almost done of setting this course to active. If we go to the settings button for the activity, we can see that the active button is now available. This means that you can launch the course if the correct presets were set or your enrollment stuff was taken care of. But this is the most basic requirement needed when you are uploading a course and setting it to active. You must have content available in there for it to be active. Without that, you will not see this button. It will always say there's no package available or something along the lines of that. It will work the same way for any activity you are trying to create. So this example that we have right here, this ILT, it wouldn't be able to be set as active unless there was a session in there. Even if the session said TBD, to be decided, at least that's some type of content in there that the LMS recognizes and says, okay, we can allow you to begin enrolling, but of course you're going to need to update that at some point. So without content, your courses can never be set to active. And to activate a course, it takes as simple as that. Just clicking on the toggle, waiting for it to become green. By doing so, your course is now technically launched. You would be able to go to the manage section, begin to enroll people manually, or if auto enrollment rules were set up, they should begin triggering immediately.
Abdul, can you go
Yes.
back to the settings though? And before making something active, can you go through at least, you know, the enrollment options that need to be checked in order for people to see them? Because we've had people that create the package and upload it and everything's ready, and then they go, we can't find it in the learner view. And
Of
that's
course.
because no enrollment rules
No
have
problem.
been set up, and some of the basic stuff has not been done. So can you go through those settings real quick?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's the part that I want to get to.
Oh,
Without
okay.
this,
Sorry.
no problem, no problem. It's always good, always good. Someone's paying attention. So what it basically means is, as mentioned by Maureen, you do need to make sure the rest of the stuff is set up. In this case, as us setting it as active, it's more of a, okay, now I can test this as a learner and see what it looks like. But of course, if you're unable to find it on the LMS, that most likely means one of two things. You're either not enrolled into the activity or that the correct enrollment rules haven't been set up. So let's go through that. The ones we're going to go through right now are going to be general, self-enrollment, auto-enrollment, and we'll talk a bit about withdrawals if that is relevant to what we're trying to do, or if you do come across self-withdrawals as well. But let's start off with general. So the general tab affects when can your activity allow learners to begin enrolling, and when can your activity actually start. By default, it will choose today's date. So this means if my course wasn't active, which you can always deactivate by simply clicking it off, and no, it doesn't affect anything majorly. All it means is the learner won't be able to take the course anymore, but it will retain all that information, meaning on the transcript page of their learner view, they will still see a mention of this activity. They will just never be able to re-access it until you reactivate it by clicking the toggle here. And that's always useful for whenever you're trying to make changes to the package, or you need to update the enrollment rules or add a new certificate, whatever the reason is. It's always good to deactivate the course when you're going to make changes on it. So that way it doesn't reflect immediately to the learner. So we're going to click on enrollment and then general. So we're going to pretend like we didn't set as active. So we now need to choose what our enrollment information is going to be. Let's start off with what we're seeing on the left-hand side. So the first thing is the first enrollment date. This means what day can learners begin enrolling into the actual activity. So if I decided, okay, I want learners to begin enrolling from tomorrow, but I don't want them to take the course, meaning they cannot start or progress through the course until Monday. Now, what this basically means, it actually did that wrong, didn't I? Yeah, it's set in the past. That doesn't help. Let's go to the 23rd. There we go. So now what we can see is learners can begin enrolling from tomorrow. Then up until the 23rd, they will basically have it on their My Courses page, waiting for the 23rd to hit. At midnight, it will then allow the learners to begin taking the activity. The idea is that you will allow learners to begin enrolling, so that way there's a certain buffer point before they can actually start taking the activity. Now, of course, you don't have to do this. By default, you usually want to launch the course immediately once the information is in there. But in a scenario, if you do need to delay the start date for whatever reason, or even the first enrollment date, this is the way that you can do it. On the right-hand side, what we will see is the last enrollment date. So this should only ever be used when you're planning on phasing a course out. So let's say next year, we're going to have Health and Safety 2023. So in that case, I know that, okay, this course is no longer going to be valid by the end of the year. So in that case, I would put in December 31st. This means that from December 31st onwards, any new learner or any existing learner who has not enrolled into this activity will no longer be able to see this course. If you are already enrolled into this activity, it does not affect you whatsoever. Now, of course, as I mentioned, you most likely won't use this unless it's a specific scenario where this calls for. Otherwise, you will most likely have unlimited set. But in another case, maybe it's an accredited course. Maybe, let's say a year from now, you want to phase this course out because a new one's going to be available. Maybe it's not health and safety. Maybe there's another reason behind it. This is what you could choose instead. If you don't want to choose a fixed date, you can simply select something from here. So in this case, I'm going to say a year from now, I don't want enrollments to take place anymore. And it will literally do that for me. 365 days from now, new enrollments will no longer take place for this activity. Now, underneath this, we have our completion date. Your completion date is when you expect the learner to complete the activity by. Now, you may not always use this, but it's always good to know as well. If you want the learners to have a bit more initiative to complete an activity, it's always good to have something like this available. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this, and I'm going to explain each one. So the first one is the most basic one. You expect the learner to complete the activity by a specific date. Now, in our case, we could just say, okay, learner is expected to finish by December 2022, because that's when the course gets phased out. So that would be one example for what we're using here. Now, in another scenario, you may not want to do that. Maybe you want the learners to complete within a specific set of days. So let's say after enrollment, I want the learner to complete within 60 days. What does that mean? So let's start bottom to top. So from here, what is selected is learner is expected to finish within 30 days from the enrollment date. So let's say without calendar, it's not going to show here. Okay, so let's say we enroll in July. So in the week of July, I decided that on the 18th, I'm going to get enrolled into the activity, or I'm going to begin enrolling learners into that activity. What will then happen is my 60 days will trigger from that point. I have 60 days from the, where did we end up with that? There we go. From the 18th of July to complete the activity. It does not matter if I start the activity or if I'm in progress or whatever the reason may be. 60 days from enrollment, that's all I have to complete the activity. The one above that, sorry, go ahead.
This is a very valuable tool, especially when you have new staff. And let's say you have a probationary period of 3 months or 6 months. This is what we use. We do the auto enrollment, which he's going to go over later. We auto enroll them on their first day, and then we give them, 90 days to complete it. And that way there's a due date, and then we set up the notifications to let them know you have 15 more days, or you have, 10 more days to complete it. And then on the last one, you have 1 day to complete it. We include the supervisor so they're aware that they haven't completed their new staff orientation. So this is very useful for those courses or learning paths.
That's absolutely correct. And we are going to be using this in conjunction with our auto enrollment rules later on. And then when we mess around with the notifications, you're going to be able to see how that comes into play with what we've selected here. Okay, let's keep moving forward. And in the next 15 minutes or so, we'll take our first break. Okay, so course start date. Now, this one's pretty simple. This is literally going to take the start date from here. So it means that 60 days from the 23rd of May, everyone has to complete the course. Once again, does not care about if the learner started or not. 60 days from the start date, everyone should be done. The one at the top here from learner start date is probably the most flexible one. So let's go back to our calendar. So let's say I get enrolled on the 18th, but I don't open up this activity till November. And I don't open it up from, let's say, not even November, let's say September. September 19th is when I open up the activity for the first time and I click on the start button. That's when my 60 days will trigger. So it waits for the learner to actually open up the activity and become in progress. Once it reads that it's in progress, that's when the 60 days begin to trigger for the learner. So the third one, or the most top one, is the most flexible one, whereas enroll date is the most useful one for whenever you're trying to get everyone to complete by a specific time. Whereas course start date is, of course, you must do this, no exceptions required or anything along the lines of that. Now, these additional ones do not fall into these tiny ones that we see in here. So we're going to skip from here to the one that's underneath this. So there's two options that are available to us in here. You may not use these, but we will talk about them. Due date defined by cohort or learner. Let's explain. This is basically where you maybe don't want everyone to have a specific completion date. Maybe this is a rolling course, meaning that everyone is supposed to have a slightly different date. And there could be groups of people that you enroll into the activity, just to kind of give them your attention for that set period. So let's say there's 3 groups of people that we need: Group A, Group B, and Group C. Each one of them is from a different department. And because it's health and safety, everyone's required to take it. So if you decide that if you don't want to shove everyone into the course all at once and you want to go through phases of enrolling batches of people, this is where this could come into play. By selecting this, what will now happen is the following. So we're just going to select this option right here. We're going to click apply. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the course to active, because we have to allow enrollments to be enabled. And then we're going to go to the manage section and we're going to go to enroll learners. Now, when I begin to enroll my learners from here, what we are now going to see is there's going to be a completion date drop-down menu available for me on the right-hand side. And we're going to talk about that once this loads. There we go. So I would locate my learners. So I'm going to say Maureen and Isabel are part of a specific group. And now, until I provide a date, it won't let me enroll them, because it means that they have to adhere to this specific date. And I could also use a cohort for this, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the idea is now these 2 people will have a specific date for their completion. So I'm going to say they have to complete everything by June 31st. If I click on enroll selected and request enrollment, what you will be able to see is it will actually define them as a cohort, meaning they're a group of people that are a part of the same group and they have a specific completion date. Let's see if, okay, I know what's going to go on. So the reason why they're not being enrolled is because we changed the first enrollment date to be today. So that's a good way of testing if it's actually going to work. So let's go back and do that again. And as you can see, it immediately begins to populate with this, because it understands, okay, we're going to enroll people into a group and they're going to have a specific completion date. And it adds them to that cohort group by simply giving the name of the completion date as the group. I'm going to refresh this just so I can push things along. There we go. We can now see that the learners are enrolled. We go back to details. And now there we go. And their cohort group is listed as their completion date. Now, maybe you don't want to go through this method of assigning someone to a group. Maybe you want to predetermine this information. This is how you do it. You're going to go to the settings option. You're going to go to enrollment, and you're going to skip down to cohorts. So this is where we group people together, and there's a few more options available for you in here. I can edit the existing one we just created, or I can create one from scratch, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to call these guys Group A. Provide a description. Now you're given the option of choosing if they have a specific start date as well as a due date as well, meaning you can control when they even start and when their due date is. So this means that you can potentially enroll everyone into this activity, and each one will go through a set period of, okay, this is your time to complete the activity. This is your start date. This is your end date. This is when you're expected to complete it by. And yes, the notifications will provide all this information as well. During the enrollment notification period, when the learner gets enrolled into the activity, if the groups have been set up correctly, it will state and give to them the idea, okay, I've been enrolled, but I can't start till this date. That's essentially what we're selecting here. So in our case, we're not going to worry so much about the start date because we want everyone to start at the same time, but we're going to update this to be September. So now everyone from here will have until the end of September to complete the activity. I can also provide if my group will have a maximum number of people. This will then limit how many people can be enrolled into this specific group. So for example, if I would only going to allow 30 people to be a part of group A, I need to designate that number right here. And anyone trying to be enrolled into this activity after the number hits 30 will not allow it. They will basically say, you can't do it. You have to use a different type of group. Your courses.
Bill, I just want to emphasize that this is totally different than accreditation.
Yes, 100%. And we will be getting to accreditation.
So for those of you who are doing compliance harassment course, for instance, or HIPAA, this is just for things like new staff orientation where you want them to have a due date, but it's not an accreditation that expires every 2 years. It's just a one-time thing. Once they've done new staff, they don't have to do it again.
That is absolutely correct. This is not associated with accreditation. We will be talking about that very soon. But the idea is, once again, just applying a due date. It's a good way just to kind of keep track of your learners in there. And once again, this is optional, but very helpful if you plan on using it. Let's finish this up. So the course assistant really doesn't matter. It's more of a placement just for a admin's name just to be there. So that way, technically, those people are a part of being in charge of that group, but that's about it. You don't have to have someone selected in there. You can simply hit add cohort, and there we go. We can now see that we have the option available in here. There is also the option of allowing learners to enroll themselves into a cohort group, but I would not suggest using that. That's going to cause you more problems than good. Giving the learner the freedom of choosing what cohort group they get enrolled into is probably going to cause a larger problem in the long run. And if you would like to use this, I will create a training video specifically talking about this. Otherwise, it's just going to take time out of what we're trying to do today for something that you may potentially use once or twice. So I can talk about that at some other point through a video. Any questions other than what we've talked about to do with groups or setting up due dates? Cool. Okay, let's get back to this. Yes.
You're going to cover the manual enrollment options?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm gonna go through that in just a few moments. We're just going to finish up with the general. We'll take our break, then we'll get back to
that page. On the general page, there are options to enroll after the last enrollment date, or you could enroll if the person hasn't met prerequisites, or like that last one that I used yesterday, single non-expiring enrollment is important if you want people to be able to go back and not just review the content they've taken, but you want to track it in the LMS that they're taking it a second time. This is great for remediation. So if somebody takes something and they failed it, but they completed it, now they can't re-enroll in it. You can't manually re-enroll them in it unless you check that single non-expiring enrollment option, in which case they'll have two enrollments, one they completed last month and the one that you're having them take again this month.
That is absolutely correct. Using the manual enrollments may override option is basically forcing a learner into the activity regardless of pre-requirements needed. So in our case, if the last enrollment date had already passed, if you want to force them into the activity, you absolutely can. If you don't care about the prerequisites, the certification period, if they're already bypassed their accreditation amount, so maybe the amount of times they could enroll was 3 times, and now this is technically the 4th, that's the option you would use. Whereas using the single non-expiring enrollment would just basically mean, as mentioned by Maureen, with being able to just kind of track that additional information with what the learner is going through. The idea of the overriding, which you will see quite a bit on the LMS, is it's supposed to change what the default options are to basically say, okay, for this specific user or this specific course, I want this. I don't care what the rules are. I need this learner in this activity. Having these all selected by default just kind of bypasses that, but I wouldn't do that. Only select the ones that are relevant with what you're trying to do, because you never want to enroll someone who shouldn't have been in there and they got enrolled simply because you had all these selected. The only other thing worth mentioning on this page was the deny access after due date. I'm not going to talk about due date defined by metadata because no one will use this. And if you do want to use this, I will provide a quick video on how to do this, because otherwise it's not really relevant without concentrating on your specific domain, because this is based around metadata. But otherwise, deny access of due date. This is supposed to be when the learner has bypassed their due date. I was supposed to complete yesterday and now I'm overdue on the course. By selecting this, what it does is it stops them from having access to the activity anymore. It will appear on the My Courses page or the My Activities page on the learner view. But what's going to happen to them is it's going to block them from being able to take it anymore. The learner would have to reach out to you or an admin and ask for them to update their due date or extend their due date to something different. By default, this would, I did it on the wrong one. 1 second. It's supposed to be this one. No, I've actually closed the window. No worries. Okay, so the idea would be that when this is selected and I've bypassed the due date, the admin would in turn have to do the following thing. They go to the manage section. They go to details. They would have to locate the learner. And you can do that by using the status as well. If they're overdue or anything along the lines of that, these will then become visible at that point. But you would go to the transcript of the learner, and then there's an option to extend due date. By using that option, what will basically happen is it will extend their due date and allow them to retake the course and complete it within the time given. They may miss out on receiving a certificate, receiving credits, or receiving badges, any of that additional stuff that you had offered for the learners if they had completed it within the time given, that learner no longer has access to because they did not complete it in time. You can, to answer Jesse's question, you absolutely can do that. And that would be more of a learning path. I'm not sure if that I'll be able to get to address that specifically today, but I will be more than happy to address that during a video or anything along the lines of that. I hope that answers the question, but it is very much possible.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so that gives a bit of a summary about the general page. We're obviously now going to go into the other side of things, the self-enroll, but it has been an hour since we've started. So how about we take a 5-minute break, run to the washroom, grab some coffee, grab some water. Does that work for everyone? I'm going to assume that's
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. No worries.